I am Clara, 29 years old, and until 3 days ago, I believed that the people who share your blood would never let you fall. My grandmother, Rose, spent 22 years proving that belief right. My uncle, Derek, destroyed it in a single afternoon. When Grandma Rose passed away and left her restaurant empire worth $12 million to Derek, he looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "Pack your things. You have no reason to be here anymore." What Derek never bothered to discover in the paperwork he signed would turn his world upside down before the weekend was over. If you are watching this, tell me in the comments where you are from. Hit that like button and subscribe, because my grandmother outsmarted the greediest man I have ever known, and she did it from beyond the grave. The first thing I remember about my mother is the sound of her laughter in my grandmother's kitchen. Claire was her name, and she had this way of throwing her head back when something genuinely amused her, her dark curls bouncing against her shoulders. I was 6 years old when a drunk driver took her from me on a rainy night in November. The police officer who came to our door held his hat against his chest and spoke in a voice so gentle it terrified me. My father had left before I was born, a man whose name I learned only from a birth certificate I found years later in a shoebox. So when my mother died, the question of who would raise me had exactly one answer. Grandma Rose did not hesitate. She drove from Savannah to Atlanta the same night, scooped me into her arms and whispered, "You are coming home with me, baby. You will always have a home with me." And she meant it. Rose Whitfield was a force of nature. She had started with a single barbecue shack on the outskirts of Savannah when she was 26, a young widow with a toddler son and $50 in savings. She smoked brisket over oak wood using her own mother's recipe, served it on paper plates, and built a reputation one plate at a time. By the time I came to live with her, Whitfield's Southern Kitchen had grown into 5 restaurants across Georgia, employing over 200 people. The business was worth millions, but Grandma never acted like it. She still drove her old Ford pickup, still wore the same apron when she visited her kitchens, and she still personally greeted regulars by name at the original location every Saturday morning. "Money is just a tool, Clara," she told me once while we were rolling biscuit dough together. "It can build a table where people gather, or it can build a wall that keeps people out. You choose." She raised me in the house behind the original restaurant, a creaky 2-story Victorian with a wraparound porch where we would sit on summer evenings listening to cicadas and talking about everything and nothing. She taught me to cook before she taught me to balance a checkbook, insisting that feeding people was the most honest form of love. Every Sunday, she closed all 5 restaurants and we cooked a massive dinner for whoever in the neighborhood wanted to come. Those Sunday suppers were sacred. My uncle Derek was Grandma Rose's only child, my mother Claire's older brother. Where my mother had inherited Grandma's warmth and generosity, Derek seemed to have absorbed none of it. He moved to Charlotte after college, took a sales job, and rarely visited. When he did come to Savannah, he spent most of his time on his phone, complaining about the humidity and dropping hints about how much the property values had gone up in Grandma's neighborhood. "You know, Mom, that lot next to Restaurant 3 is worth a fortune if you developed it," he would say over dinner, barely touching the food she had spent hours preparing. "That lot is where our employees park, Derek," Grandma would reply patiently, "and they matter more to me than whatever a developer would pay." I tried to have a relationship with my uncle. He was, after all, my only link to my mother besides Grandma, but Derek treated me like an inconvenience. At family gatherings, he would introduce me vaguely, "This is Claire's daughter," as if my name was not worth remembering. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, Grandma sat in the front row crying happy tears. Derek sent a text message 3 days later that said, "Congrats, smart move." I studied hospitality management at the University of Georgia, hoping to eventually help Grandma with the restaurants. During summers, I worked every position, from dishwasher to hostess to line cook. I wanted to understand the business from the ground up, the way Grandma had built it. She never pressured me to join the company. "Find your own path first," she said. "The restaurants will be here if you want them." But I could see how her face lit up whenever I asked questions about supply chains or menu development. After graduation, I came back to Savannah and took over marketing and operations for the restaurant group. Grandma and I made a good team. She was the soul of the business, the one who remembered every employee's birthday and personally tasted every new dish. I was the one who modernized the ordering system, launched a catering division, and negotiated better contracts with local farms. In 3 years, revenue grew by 40%. Derek noticed. His visits became more frequent, always with suggestions about franchising, selling to a larger restaurant group, or monetizing the brand. He never asked how the food tasted or how the staff was doing. His questions were always about margins, valuations, and exit strategies. Grandma listened politely and changed the subject every time. Then Grandma got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3, diagnosed on a Tuesday afternoon that shattered my world for the second time. The doctor explained treatment options in a careful, measured voice while I gripped Grandma's hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. She looked at me with those steady brown eyes and said, "Well, we had better make every day count then." I scaled back my work immediately, shifting to remote management so I could be with her. We moved her bedroom downstairs to avoid the stairs, and I set up a small workstation in the corner of the living room so I could handle business while staying close. Hospice nurses came twice a week, but the daily care was mine. Administering medications, tracking symptoms, helping her to the porch on good days so she could feel the sun on her face. During those months, Grandma and I grew even closer, which I had not thought possible. She told me stories I had never heard, about her own grandmother who had cooked for field workers during harvest season, about the early days of the restaurant when she could not afford to hire help and cooked, served, and cleaned until midnight every night. She spoke about my mother with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "Claire had your same stubborn kindness," she said one evening. She could not pass a stray cat without bringing it home. Derek started calling weekly once he learned about the diagnosis. He flew down twice, both times asking detailed questions about Grandma's finances, the business structure, and her estate plans. During his second visit, I overheard him on the phone in the hallway. "The doctors say maybe 4 months. I need to make sure everything is in order before then." His voice carried no grief, only logistics. Grandma heard it too. That night, after Derek left for the airport, she asked me to call Mitchell Perry, her attorney of 30 years. "Tell him to come tomorrow," she said. "There are things I need to finalize." Mitchell arrived the next morning with a leather briefcase and a gentle manner. They spent the entire afternoon in the study with the door closed. When Mitchell emerged, he squeezed my shoulder. "Your grandmother is one of the wisest women I have ever known, Clara. Take care of her." He left without elaborating. That night, Grandma seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. "Promise me you will keep cooking Sunday suppers," she said as I tucked a blanket around her legs. "No matter what happens, keep that table open." "I promise," I said. "And one more thing," she added, her voice quiet but firm. "Do not let anyone make you feel like you do not belong. You have earned your place in this family and in this business. Remember that." The last 10 days moved with terrible speed. Grandma's pain increased. The hospice team adjusted her medication, and there were stretches where she drifted in and out of consciousness. Derek flew down for what he called a final visit, bringing an expensive bottle of wine that Grandma could not drink and spending most of his time inventorying items around the house. On her final morning, Grandma woke with unusual clarity. She held my hand and looked at me with an intensity I will never forget. "You are my legacy, Clara. Not the restaurants, not the money. You." She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. And by sunset, the woman who had given me everything was gone. Rose Whitfield's funeral drew over 600 people. The original restaurant closed for 3 days, the only unplanned closure in its history. People came from across the state, former employees, longtime customers, suppliers, neighbors, and friends, spanning 5 decades of community building. I wore the simple navy dress Grandma had always complimented, and I carried a sprig of rosemary from her garden because she always said rosemary was for remembrance. Derek arrived in a rented BMW with his wife Vanessa, who looked around the modest church as if she had accidentally walked into the wrong building. During the service, I watched Derek check his watch 4 times. When the pastor invited family to speak, Derek delivered a short, stiff statement about his mother's entrepreneurial spirit and savvy business sense. He mentioned the restaurant's real estate value. At a funeral, when I spoke, I talked about Sunday suppers and the smell of oak smoke and the way Grandma called everyone baby and meant it. I talked about the night she drove through a storm to bring me home when I was 6. I talked about how she measured success in full bellies and second chances. Half the church was crying by the time I finished. Derek was scrolling through his phone. After the service, Mitchell Perry approached me outside. He was wearing a dark suit and an expression that mixed sympathy with something I could not quite read. "Clara, the will reading is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 at my office. Please be there on time." Derek, who had been hovering nearby collecting business cards from attendees, overheard. Finally, he muttered to Vanessa, "Let us get this sorted." The reception was held at the original restaurant. Grandma's staff had prepared her signature dishes, and the room hummed with shared memories and laughter through tears. I moved from table to table, hugging people whose lives Grandma had touched. Derek spent the reception in the corner booth with his phone out, occasionally gesturing Vanessa over to show her something on the screen. I heard him say the words listing price twice. That evening, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in Grandma's kitchen. The worn wooden table still held the marks from decades of meal preparation, knife scratches and flour stains that mapped our family history. I pressed my palm flat against the surface and wept. The next morning at Mitchell's office, I sat in a leather chair across the conference table from Derek and Vanessa. Derek drummed his fingers on the table impatiently while Mitchell organized his documents. "I will now read the last will and testament of Rose Marie Whitfield," Mitchell announced. The initial portions covered funeral wishes, small bequests to longtime employees, and donations to local charities. Derek exhaled impatiently through each one. Then Mitchell reached the primary clause. "To my son, Derek Allen Whitfield, I leave the entirety of Whitfield's Southern Kitchen, including all 5 restaurant locations, associated properties, business accounts, and assets, valued at approximately $12 million. Derek's face broke into an unconcealed grin. Vanessa grabbed his arm. He straightened in his chair as if he had just been crowned. "That is what I expected," he said, nodding as though confirming something he had already decided. Mom knew the business needed experienced leadership. Mitchell continued through several more paragraphs of administrative details. I sat frozen, my hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my composure. Not a single mention of my name. Had Grandma forgotten me? Had 22 years of love and care simply evaporated in the legal language of a will? When Mitchell finished, Derek stood immediately. "Excellent. I want to schedule meetings with the general managers of all 5 locations this week, and I will need the financial records sent to my accountant in Charlotte." He glanced at me with something between pity and dismissal. "Clara, I appreciate everything you did for Mom, but I will be restructuring the business, and I need to bring in my own team. You should probably start looking for other opportunities." Mitchell held out the complete document. "Mr. Whitfield, I strongly recommend you review the full will carefully. There are provisions that require your attention." "I got the gist of it," Derek said, waving the folder away. "Have your assistant email me a summary. We are flying back to Charlotte tonight, and I want to hit the ground running Monday morning." After Derek and Vanessa left, Mitchell turned to me. His expression was unreadable. "Go home and rest, Clara. I will be in touch soon." I drove back to Grandma's house in a fog. The porch swing creaked in the breeze as I climbed the steps for what I assumed would be one of the last times. Inside, the house still smelled like her lavender hand cream and the dried herbs hanging in the kitchen. I sat on her bed and held her pillow to my chest and cried until I had nothing left. The next morning, Derek called at 7 a.m. "I need you out of the house by Friday," he said without preamble. "Vanessa and I are coming down to renovate. The property alone is worth over $1 million, and we want to list it separately from the business." "This is my home," I said, my voice barely holding. "I have lived here since I was 6. "It was Mom's home," he corrected. "And now it is mine. You have 4 days. I am sure you have friends who can put you up." He hung up before I could respond. I spent that afternoon packing 22 years of life into boxes and suitcases. Grandma's recipe cards, organized in her slanting handwriting across 3 wooden boxes, the apron she wore on my first day working in the kitchen, photographs of my mother that existed nowhere else, the rosemary plant from the windowsill. Each item I wrapped felt like a small funeral. On Thursday, the day before Derek's deadline, a moving company arrived at the house, not one I had called. Derek had hired them to begin clearing out furniture. 2 men with a truck stood on the porch looking uncomfortable as I answered the door in yesterday's clothes with swollen eyes. "Ma'am, we were told to start in the kitchen," one of them said apologetically. "The kitchen is not going anywhere today," I replied, blocking the doorway. I called Derek, who answered impatiently. "Clara, do not make this difficult. The movers cost $400 an hour. If you are not out by tomorrow, I will have to take legal steps. Legal steps against your niece for living in the house where she grew up." "Business is business," he said, and I heard Vanessa in the background say, "Just tell her to leave already." I sent the movers away and spent one last night in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling where Grandma had stuck glow-in-the-dark stars when I was 7 because I was afraid of the dark. They still glowed faintly green, tiny constellations holding 22 years of safety. Friday morning, I loaded my car with everything I could carry and drove to my best friend Natalie's apartment. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside without a word. I slept on her couch for 2 nights, barely eating, unable to explain the full scope of what had happened without breaking down. On Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. Mitchell Perry. Clara, I need to see you tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. It concerns your grandmother's estate, and it is urgent. Is something wrong? Quite the opposite, Mitchell said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like amusement. Bring identification and be prepared for a longer meeting. I arrived at Mitchell's office 10 minutes early, wearing the only professional outfit I had managed to pack. Mitchell greeted me at the door himself, which was unusual. He led me to his private office rather than the conference room. Clara, I need to ask you something first. Did Derek give you any financial support after the will reading? Any offer to help you with housing, living expenses, anything at all? No, I said. He told me to leave by Friday and hired movers to clear the house. Mitchell leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Your grandmother predicted this with remarkable accuracy. She told me, Derek will show Clara the door within a week, probably sooner. He opened a leather portfolio and removed a thick document. She was right. It took him exactly 2 days. What are you talking about? Mitchell put on his reading glasses. The inheritance Derek received was conditional. Page 19 of the will, which your uncle did not bother to read, contains the following clause. He read aloud. The bequest to Derek was contingent on several specific requirements. He was to maintain Clara's residence in the family home for as long as she wished to live there. He was to retain all current Whitfield employees for a minimum of 1 year with no reduction in pay or benefits. He was to preserve the Sunday supper tradition at the original location, and he was to provide Clara a meaningful role in the business with fair compensation. Should Derek fail to meet any of these conditions, Mitchell continued, the entire estate, including all 5 restaurants, associated properties, and business assets, transfers immediately and irrevocably to Clara Rose Whitfield. The room tilted. I grabbed the armrest of my chair. That cannot be real. It is very real, and it is ironclad. Rose and I spent the better part of a year drafting this document. She had it reviewed by 2 independent attorneys and notarized in triplicate. Your uncle violated 3 of the 4 conditions within 48 hours of the reading. Why did she not just leave everything to me directly? I whispered. Mitchell removed his glasses and looked at me with an expression of deep respect. Because your grandmother believed in second chances. She wanted to give Derek one final opportunity to prove he could put family above profit. She told me, if Derek does right by Clara and the employees, then he deserves the business. But if he shows his true colors, Clara will be protected. She knew her son, Clara. She loved him, but she knew him. Does Derek know? Not yet. I have scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning. Your grandmother also left video messages for both of you, to be played in person with both parties present. She was very specific about that. I drove back to Natalie's apartment in a state of shock. The world looked different, the same streets rearranged by a truth I was still absorbing. When I told Natalie what had happened, she stared at me for a full 10 seconds before saying, Your grandmother was an absolute legend. The next morning, I arrived at Mitchell's office to find Derek already seated in the conference room with a lawyer I did not recognize, a thin man with sharp eyes and an expensive watch. Derek looked irritated but not concerned. Let us make this quick, Derek said. I have calls with contractors this afternoon about the renovation. I appreciate your time, Mitchell replied evenly. Before we begin, I should inform you that this meeting concerns the conditional provisions of your mother's will which you declined to read last week. Conditional provisions? Derek's lawyer leaned forward. Mitchell turned on a screen mounted on the wall. Rose requested that both of you view these messages before we discuss any legal matters. My grandmother's face appeared on screen, and my breath caught. She was sitting in her kitchen, the same kitchen Derek had sent movers to clear out. She looked tired but composed, and she was wearing her favorite blue cardigan. Derek, she began, and her voice was steady and direct. If you are watching this, then you have done exactly what I feared you would. You have pushed Clara aside and started treating my life's work like a piece of real estate to be flipped. Derek's jaw tightened. His lawyer scribbled furiously. I built Whitfield's southern kitchen with my bare hands, son. I kneaded dough until my fingers bled. I served plates until my feet swelled. I did not build 5 restaurants so that someone could sell them to the highest bidder and walk away with a check. Every employee in those kitchens is part of my family. Every customer who walks through those doors is a guest in my home. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a sadness that filled the room. I gave you a chance, Derek. One simple test. Take care of Clara. Keep the family together. Honor what I built. You could not manage it for even a week. Her eyes glistened. I love you, son. I have always loved you. But love does not mean I will let you destroy what matters most. The video ended. Silence pressed against the walls. There is a message for Clara as well, Mitchell said softly. Grandma appeared again, and this time her expression transformed into pure warmth. My sweet girl, she said, and I was already crying. If you are watching this, then everything happened the way I thought it would, and I am so sorry you had to go through it. But I needed Derek to show you himself who he really is, because I knew you would keep making excuses for him otherwise. She smiled, and it was the same smile she wore when I brought home good grades or mastered a new recipe. The restaurants are yours now, Clara, not because Derek failed, but because you earned them. You learned this business from the dish pit up. You know every employee's name and every supplier's handshake. You have my recipes, my values, and something I could never teach anyone. You have heart. She held up a photograph, and I recognized it instantly. My mother and me, age 4, standing in front of the original restaurant on opening day, both of us grinning with barbecue sauce on our cheeks. Your mama would be so proud of you, baby. Run this business the way I taught you. Keep the Sunday suppers going. Feed people with love, not just food. And remember, the secret ingredient in everything I ever cooked was not in any recipe card. It was showing up for people when it mattered. The screen went dark. I wiped my face with both hands, shaking. Across the table, Derek sat very still. His lawyer was whispering urgently, but Derek did not seem to hear him. Mitchell broke the seal on a final envelope. Rose left one additional message, addressed to both of you. He read aloud, Derek and Clara. The restaurants and all associated assets now belong to Clara, legally and completely, but I am not closing the door on my son. If Derek demonstrates genuine change over a period of 2 years, contributing to the community and treating people with the respect they deserve, Clara may choose to include him in the business in whatever capacity she sees fit. This decision is entirely Clara's, and it must come from real relationship, not guilt or pressure. Derek finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. This will not hold up. I will take this to court. You are welcome to try, Mitchell replied. However, the will contains a no contest clause. Any legal challenge forfeits your right to the reconciliation path Rose created. I should also mention that your mother discussed this plan with every general manager in the company over the past year. The leadership team is fully prepared for Clara's transition to ownership. Derek turned to me. The arrogance had cracked. Underneath it was something I had never seen in him before, something that looked like fear. Clara, be reasonable. I am your uncle. I am family. You cannot run 5 restaurants. You are 29 years old. Grandma was 26 when she started with 1, I said quietly. I made a mistake, he said, shifting to a tone I did not recognize from him. I was grieving. I was not thinking straight. We can work this out. You were not grieving, Derek. You were calculating. You started calculating the day you found out she was sick. I kept my voice calm, but my hands were trembling under the table. You measured her house for renovations before her funeral flowers had wilted. You hired movers to clear the kitchen where she built her entire life. That was not grief. His lawyer tugged his sleeve. Derek, we should discuss this privately. Derek stood. For a moment, he looked at me, and I thought I saw a flicker of something genuine beneath the anger and shock. Then it disappeared behind the familiar mask. This is not over, he said and walked out. Mitchell waited until the door closed. That went about as your grandmother predicted. She told me, Derek will threaten lawyers before he considers an apology. Will he actually contest it? He can try, but the document is airtight, and his violations are thoroughly documented. His own movers provided a time-stamped work order. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing transition plans. Grandma had left detailed notes on every aspect of the business, from vendor relationships to the maintenance schedule for the smokers. She had even written individual letters to each general manager explaining the transition and expressing her confidence in me. That afternoon, I drove to the house. My house now. I unlocked the front door with the key I had never returned, and the smell of lavender and dried herbs wrapped around me like arms. I walked through every room slowly, touching surfaces, opening curtains, letting the light back in. In the kitchen, I found a handwritten note tucked inside Grandma's recipe box that I had somehow missed while packing. Clara, if you are reading this, you found your way home. Now make it yours. Love always, Grandma. The first week was overwhelming. I met with every restaurant team, visited every kitchen, and sat with every general manager. Some were cautious. Most were relieved. A few old-timers who had worked with Grandma since the early days simply hugged me and said, "It is about time. I made mistakes. I approved a vendor change that turned out to be more expensive than the original. I overcorrected on a staffing decision and had to walk it back. But I learned fast, and I asked for help when I needed it, something Grandma had always done and Derek never would have." Derek made his first attempt at reconciliation 3 weeks later. He called, not texted, and asked if we could have lunch. "Not about the business," he said. "Just lunch." I agreed, cautiously. We met at a neutral restaurant, not one of ours. The conversation was stilted and awkward. Derek talked about his childhood for the first time, about growing up feeling like he could never measure up to Grandma's expectations, about resenting the business that seemed to get more of her attention than he did. I did not agree with his conclusions, but I listened. Grandma had asked me to leave the door open, and I would honor that. 6 months later, I launched the Rose Whitfield Culinary Scholarship, providing full training and job placement for young people from underserved communities. The program started small, 8 students in the first class, but the waiting list grew faster than I expected. Every graduate was guaranteed a position at one of our restaurants, starting in the kitchen and mentored by senior staff. Derek showed up at the scholarship launch event. He did not try to take credit or position himself for cameras. He stood in the back, watched the ceremony, and left quietly. 2 days later, he sent me a text that said simply, "Mom would have loved this." It was the most honest thing he had ever communicated to me. Over the following year, something slowly shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, and certainly not forgetfulness, but something like understanding. I established a modest trust for Derek, enough to live comfortably. Mitchell advised caution but supported the decision. "Rose would approve of your compassion," he told me. "Just make sure it is never mistaken for weakness." 1 year after inheriting Whitfield's Southern Kitchen, I invited Derek to join a newly formed community advisory board for the scholarship program. The position carried no business authority, but it connected him to the mission Grandma had always valued. He accepted without negotiation. "Thank you," he said at the first board meeting, and for the first time in my life, I believed he meant it. As for the business, it thrived. We opened a 6th location in Atlanta, my mother's city, serving the same recipes Grandma had perfected over 50 years. The Sunday suppers continued at the original restaurant, every single week, no exceptions. I cooked alongside the kitchen team, wearing Grandma's apron, greeting guests by name just like she did. The most important change was invisible. The girl who once searched for her uncle's approval at family gatherings, who packed her life into boxes when a man told her she did not belong, had become a woman who trusted her own judgment. The uncertainty I felt walking into Mitchell's office that Monday morning had been replaced by a quiet confidence earned through early mornings, hard decisions, and the steady rhythm of feeding people with love. On the first anniversary of Grandma's passing, I drove to the cemetery alone. Her headstone was simple, just as she had wanted. It read her name, the years of her life, and the words she had chosen herself. "The table is always set. Come as you are." "You were right about everything, Grandma," I said, placing fresh rosemary beside the stone. "About the business, about Derek, about me." A warm breeze stirred the Spanish moss in the live oaks overhead. In that quiet moment, I understood completely what my grandmother had known all along. The restaurants were never really the inheritance. The recipes were not the legacy. What she left me was the understanding that how you treat people when you have power over them reveals everything about your character. She left me the courage to stand firm when someone tried to erase me. And she left me the wisdom to know that keeping the door open for someone is not the same as letting them walk all over you. As I drove back to the house that was finally and fully mine, I thought about how fast everything had changed. In 72 hours, I had gone from sleeping on a friend's couch to owning a $12 million restaurant empire. But the real transformation had started 22 years earlier, in a kitchen that smelled like oak smoke and rosemary, with a woman who taught me that feeding people was the truest form of love. That lesson was worth more than any inheritance. And every Sunday, when I open those restaurant doors and set that long table for whoever wants to come, I carry it forward. I hope this story touched something in you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? Have you ever had someone in your life who believed in you when nobody else did? Tell me your story in the comments below. Like this video if it moved you, subscribe if you want to hear more, and share it with someone who needs to know that the people who throw you away are not the ones who define you. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one.